Hello, I'm Paula Bolton, co-founder of Lesbian Labour. Welcome to our Proud Lesbian series. During Pride Month, I'll be interviewing a wide range of lesbians to gather lesbian perspectives and to hear about lesbian lives in 2022. And for my fifth interview, I'm very pleased to have with me today Hannah Borelli, who's a British Canadian lesbian and feminist. Hello, Hannah. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Paula. How are you?
Okay, so you are uniquely placed to be able to cast some light on the situation in Canada, which in my understanding of things is that bit further down the road, and we're on the same road. So, you know, hearing your story will hopefully be able to show us where we might be headed and how we might be able to affect that process. Do we want to go there? Do we want to try and go somewhere else? Is the destination the same? So perhaps you could start by just sharing what it was like for you coming out in Canada.
Yeah, and you know, I was thoughtful about this question in that coming out isn't a one-time event. You know, people talk about coming out as if it's this thing you do once and it's maybe an awkward conversation with a parent or whatever, and that's done and dusted and you're a lesbian and everyone knows and it's wonderful. But really, like, it's as lesbians and presumably gay men know, it's a constant process, right? It's in the workplace, it's in a new group of friends, it's in whatever it's something that you kind of have to do intermittently, or maybe choose not to do in some situations or not in other situations. So yeah, it was interesting coming out in a place that was so queer in such a short period of time. And I remember it wasn't that way growing up. Obviously, queer and trans and the QT plus stuff started, I think, probably around 2010, 2012 in Canada. And it was a really interesting thing to see that there was this like massive kind of corporate push, governmental push, it was really the powers that be in society. It was very top down, it wasn't like we all had an organic awakening as Canadians. And I think when non-Canadians think of Canada, they think of like Toronto or Vancouver or shiny Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or whatever. But really, it's a country that's like a petrostate. It's a lot of it is oil and gas and agriculture, and there's lots of kind of small towns that are kind of centered around resource extraction. There's this huge difference really between the countryside and the city, and it was a really interesting thing to watch the culture change in this top-down sort of way in such a short period of time, and the kind of the dissonance between, you know, having the HR poster on the wall explaining like pronouns and the gender unicorn, whatever, and then just being a lesbian in the workplace, that they're still it didn't those gains weren't made for lesbians by this kind of corporate push, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was really odd, and I think it has created some resentment around these politics and the average Canadian, the average Briton, the average whoever, the average American don't know the difference between the queer stuff and just regular homosexuals. They see it as one, it's the LGBT, it's under one big umbrella. So yeah, it was interesting. It was a lot of resentment. I remember in a workplace situation once, kind of earlier in my life, I referred to my partner at the time as a they, just because I didn't want to have the "oh, you're a lesbian" conversation. So I said, oh, you know, they are picking me up at such and such time or whatever. And I had a coworker giggle and said, oh, like a they, like on the unicorn poster, he. And it was like, no, not that kind of they. I just mean she. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I think it's very tense around these politics. I also think that Canadians are allergic to political conversations, allergic to difficult conversations. We're like a country of super polite British people, basically. Like upper class British people, I think, is kind of the broader culture, basically. So I think it just made everyone very, very tense. And any one of these kind of interactions I would have where I would come out as a lesbian, there was just this like tense kind of feeling that I don't think was really there before that queer corporate push, to be honest. So yeah, that's a long answer to that question, but I hope that you understand what I mean.
That's interesting. Yeah. So was there where was that push coming from and coordinated through? I mean, was there an equivalent to what, you know, when we look at it, we tend to think that this is coming from Stonewall through its various offshoots and various organizations, all singing from the same song sheet, all following the same training manual, and then the Denton's playbook the other way around. You know, was there any kind of coordinating organization rolling it out that way?
There isn't a Canadian or really an American equivalent to Stonewall. There really isn't. There isn't like a singular organization really. Like, I think in the UK, it is fair to say a lot of this has come from Stonewall, who has borrowed it from Americans and borrowed it from Canadians, actually. I think a lot of the stuff was tested in Canada before it even entered the American context. So no, I think it was the Trudeau government, which would have been, when was that, 2013 when he was first elected. I think that was a big push that he was a part of. So it was the federal government agencies. Then it started kind of in the trade union space. There was a lot of that. And then it was the left, leftist activist space, climate spaces, that sort of thing. Climate activism is a huge, it's probably the most popular kind of left movement in Canada is climate activism, because it's a country that has just so many resource extraction projects, the pipelines, the whatever, and also this beautiful nature, right? So there's this tension between oil and gas workers and environmentalists that seems to be kind of the main tension. Anyway, I noticed it in environmental spaces, which is a very like NGO, not-for-profit charity. Like Greenpeace is $1 billion, a huge, it has a huge overhead and revenue, and it started in Vancouver. And so yeah, I think it just made its way through the third sector, the trade unions, the governments, the municipalities, and I don't think I could say it's the singular organization that did it. I know that there's some work being done by some women who have talked about how there's a Department of Transgender Studies at the University of Victoria, and that those people have gone on to consult in these different third sector organizations or whatever, and that could be a big part of it. And I think there's the Martine Rothblatt connection there, if I remember correctly. But I think Canada is a big country geographically, but a very small population. Like, we have the population of California in the second largest country in the world, so by land mass. So I think there's a huge opportunity for people to take over. And what they do is they start kind of in local council meetings, in municipalities, and they make their way up bigger and bigger until there's this political push. And I think from the ruling class, really, they saw this as like the new gay. We want to be on the cutting edge of what young people want. It's a really easy win for us. We don't care about women's rights anyway, so we can throw those away. Who cares? And we get to seem very edgy and very progressive, like the Canadian prison. Was it a memorandum, or basically the action that led to the women's prison, having men in women's prisons, happened because Justin Trudeau was doing like a town hall, going around the country kind of event thing, and a transgender activist asked about, oh, these men or these trans women are being tortured in men's prisons. What are you going to do about it? And by the next day, there was a memo to the prisons saying, let this policy happen. I think the policy was before that it required like a penile inversion surgery before you could be moved, and that has now changed. So I just think it really is an ideology that really lines up with ruling class interests in a lot of ways. It's a very profitable thing for pharmaceutical companies. It's a very easy thing for kind of bourgeois politicians to go, look how progressive I am. And that with the power of like those third sector lobbyists really did it. So.
Right. So coming back to then how it must have, like you said, you were aware of that shift towards queer. Had you formed your ideas about yourself as a young woman within the existing lesbian, gay, bisexual framework of this is a sexual orientation, and was that bewildering? I mean, how did the how was this shift to queer manifesting on the ground? The different identity labels, what was it? Did women stop using the word lesbian? How did it work there?
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of women weren't using the word lesbian, and again, I just noticed how tense it was. And I as you are when you're young, I was quite naive, and I just thought like, I just have to have kind of a conversation about this, and it'll all become really clear to me. I need to just be like recommended the correct book or something, and everything will kind of fall together and it'll make sense. And I must have some kind of like misunderstanding. And I think it's a really unique experience you have as a young person. Get involved in politics, especially when you're in a room of older people and they're all talking about something and you're going, am I like just stupid for not understanding what's going on? So yeah, there was less women using the word lesbian. It was a lot about non-binary identity, which is something that never resonated with me really. I never really understood it. I thought that there was kind of an explosion of feminist stuff around Me Too and in online spaces in like 2016, 2017. And I found that very impactful for me in my like political development. So I had these kind of feminist ideas, and then I was seeing the non-binary stuff, and I thought this doesn't really make sense together. Again, it must be an misunderstanding. And I like so naive and so crazy. I can't imagine. Like I asked one friend, another lesbian, about the genital preferences thing and the cotton ceiling. I just went out and asked her about it one day, thinking like, oh, like she's kind of more involved with this queer stuff than me. She must have like a simple answer. And just the absolute look of horror on her face and the effort to just like quickly change the conversation was crazy. Yeah. So and also this time I had a bit of sympathy always towards radical feminism, because no one was able to convince me on any level about the question of prostitution, that it was this, because they went further than just like, oh, we should decriminalize and regulate or whatever. It was, this is liberating, this is wonderful, this is an expression of like free sexuality or whatever. And there was just no amount of conversation that could ever convince me about that. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind, and I was thinking like, oh, if the radical feminists are right about prostitution, maybe they're right about this other thing. And I was trying to be curious, and figure this stuff out. But you could just see it. You could see like cross-dressing men being in like lesbian parties at Pride, and like the weird tension around that. There was also a lot of like fawning of these men being like, oh, you're so wonderful and interesting. And I just thought, this is really weird. This man clearly has like to be fair, like a severe mental illness. This woman is like a successful author. Like, what is this fawning thing about? I don't really get it. Like it was all just very tense. And yeah, it was when I stopped trying to like rationalize through all of it, it was a bit of a relief, to be honest.
Yeah. So the non-binary thing was the first explosion then, in terms of, do you think that was where lesbians went first of all, in terms of we're now not kosher, where do we go? Can you, have you got any sense of how, what percentage of pre-queer there'd have been this pathway for lesbians to just grow up and be ourselves? At what point did they jump ship into non-binary and get convinced that there must be trans men then? I mean, is there any verity to that claim? Because we claim it all the time. You know, I mean, I know individuals for whom that's true and have seen statistics, but it is the one thing the other side say, prove it. You're just denying agency to those who would rather define as trans and who find more comfort in that. So, you know, did you sense a pressure coming from social contagion or, you know, other places? Obviously, if you've got a top-down government saying this stuff's the way to go, it's difficult to step out from under that, and if it's backed up by university and academia. But given that young people are meant to be the ones that rebel against both those forces, what is going on there?
Good question. I mean, it's a bit difficult to tell. It's like how the fish doesn't know he's in a fish tank or whatever. You don't know you're in water. It was a bit hard to tell. It just kind of suddenly felt like lesbian was the old school term. The newer thing was non-binary. It was just like almost kind of a direct switch, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I didn't, I like it was a direct switch. And whenever I would meet a woman who would introduce herself as a lesbian, or I heard talk about lesbians, I just had in my mind like older women, because that's like the older term. The newer term is non-binary. It's crazy that we get told by these like activists that there's like this distinction between sexuality and what they call gender. You know, they're very distinct things, whatever, but it was like this cohort of women just took on non-binary, and I saw it in women more than just lesbians, women who were like just like gender non-conforming, women who didn't want to have long hair, women who, you know, all this stuff. It was all of a sudden women who had like trauma or, you know, didn't relate to their bodies in a healthy way. It just, and it seems really kind of, without more examination of it, and if you don't have a feminist analysis, it seems kind of like creative and interesting and almost countercultural or something. So yeah, it's difficult for me to say like when exactly that shift happened. I think when I was a young person, that shift was already happening, and the idea was that this is just kind of the new terminology, and because it's an essentially meaningless term, it's easy for anyone to take on that label. Like I see like on TikTok, like very gender conforming, very feminine women with like full faces of makeup and long hair and acrylic nails being like, I'm non-binary, you know, like it's because it's just meaningless. So it's also difficult. It's really Genevieve Gluck has talked about this in a great way. It's very disorienting because you can't actually ask questions about something if you don't know what anyone is talking about. Yeah. You can't examine anything, and I think it leaves a lot of young people being like, I must be stupid and this is above my head, so whatever you have to say, you know, like I just want to be accepting, I want to be a nice person, I don't want to judge anyone. So yeah, I don't think it's deniable on any level that there has been that switch. I don't know very many. I think it's a lot more common in places like Canada and the United States than in the UK. I think people in the UK still use the word lesbian. I haven't seen it used in Canada by a third sector organization. It's used barely by Pride and Pride societies. And even if it is used, there's this huge caveat like, oh no, bisexual women are allowed as well. Or it's queer women, or it's non-men loving people. Like it's all these weird euphemisms, and yeah. So I guess I don't know how anyone can be in denial about this being the phenomenon it is. Right. It's trackable. Like you look at like GLAAD, which is an American organization, how much they use the term lesbian. It's very, very little, as opposed to like trans or non-binary. Or
so again, back to you know, imagining what's going on for young emerging lesbians. So a teen who discovers that her attraction is to another woman. It sounds like she's not going to be seeing role models around her that pattern that as well, that's about being a lesbian. She's more likely to see the non-binary thing, but what about trans men? Is that now, you know, a really common phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, the terms change all the time. Something that I've been seeing a lot lately is this term trans mask. So trans masculine, which I think they would say is like an umbrella term or something, like to mean non-binary trans men or whatever. And it's a really fluid thing where you start off with non-binary, because again, non-binary is meaningless. Like I know quote unquote non-binary women, lesbians, who've had double mastectomies as being non-binary without having to say that they're trans men or anything. There are quote unquote non-binary women who had like testosterone, whatever. And I think that it's really interesting that like masculinity is seen as a removal from womanhood. You know, you're not a woman, you're trans mask. So that can mean anything from I don't like wearing a bra. Like I've seen on TikTok saying women who are like, I don't want to shave, I'm trans mask. Like it's this absolute fascistic need to enforce total and complete compliance with femininity, and any removal from that whatsoever. And the long-haired makeup acrylic nail types who are calling themselves non-binary, that just means they think that they're intelligent and worth listening to. I really think that's what they think that means. And like, why would you want to listen to a woman, you know? And I guess I forgot to mention just like pornography and how like the only time that you're allowed to use the word lesbian to mean what it actually means is in pornography. And I definitely noticed as porn became more commonplace and like more ubiquitous and everywhere and acceptable. Like when I was like in high school, it was still a bit odd for like women would be like, oh, I don't want my boyfriend looking at porn. That was still, you know, not an abnormal view to have. We've gone completely past that now. Like there's just no way to even have that standard. So definitely the lesbophobic abuse that I got was, okay, can I see a photo of your girlfriend? What does she look like? This sort of thing that was all in line with kind of the logic of pornography. And I think women don't want to be brutalized, like don't see themselves as those like bodies that are being brutalized in pornography. So the term lesbian is foreclosed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just you mentioned TikTok there. I mean, you've built quite a following for yourself on TikTok, and it's gone, and you've started all over again and built it up again. So tell us a bit about your TikTok activities and your activism there. What are you finding on TikTok, Hannah?
Oh God, I mean, I have to like remind myself often I'm talking to very young people, but I've noticed a lot of things. It's the lack of an ability to articulate an argument meaningfully in any kind of way. It's just you're transphobic, you're a TERF, end of discussion. And I'm actually really fortunate in a funny sort of way, though I'm obviously not glad that this is the standard, that like I would say 80 to 90% of the abuse I get on there is about how I look. And I'm not a woman who is particularly insecure about how I look, so it just kind of like goes over my head, and that's fine. But it's a lot of like very sexist, very misogynist, very openly lesbophobic abuse that you get for saying things like, you know, like women are female, or just like inviting kind of critical thinking about this stuff. And I think it's really worthwhile work to do, though I find it exhausting often, just talking to these young people, because this is where they like consume their media and consume their identity. Like they talk very openly about how, you know, TikTok made them trans, or TikTok made them realize that they were trans or whatever. These are like also children of the pandemic who spent their years from like 15 to 17 and 16 to 18, which are, you know, developmentally important years, kind of inside and online. So So yeah, it's I get I get lots of comments that are like, oh, like you're so, like these intellectual arguments. I don't think I'm particularly intellectual about it. I just kind of analyze where things are at. And when you confront them with the kind of rank sexism of this, it's interesting. They weaponize race a lot. They talk about race, and how this is like white feminism or bourgeois feminism, or how second wave feminism is quote unquote problematic or something, which if you've been familiar or around the second wave in any way, it's definitely not white. And it's certainly not, these ideas aren't exactly popular in the global south, which is what I like to tell them generally. I won't try going to anywhere outside of like the Anglophone West and saying dumb shit like women can have penises or whatever. But yeah, it's made me thoughtful about how we, what is there about the second wave that is worth bringing on to like the next generation of women and the next generation of feminists. Kind of repackaging those ideas in ways that are understandable and digestible and interesting to engage with. It's kind of what I'm trying to do is kind of do an invitation basically to critical thinking. And I try sort of in my delivery of everything to be very to the point, very unemotional. And I think that they're very affronted by that. And I can't really believe that I'm not upset about the kind of abuse they throw at me when I'm about how I look. Like there's like a deeply insecure generation of women who've like grown up on Instagram and the presented with a visual representation of themselves all the time. So yeah, it's I get banned about every 3 months, 4 months. And I have to just start again.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly being well appreciated in you know, in the circles of those of us that are actually trying to fight for the right for, you know, save the tomboy, to make it very, very brief. So one of the ideas that I you know, I wonder about is, you know, imagining a young lesbian going to a queer youth group. And there was one video I remember seeing where, from basically saying, this young lass saying, I'm a lesbian, and, you know, get off my back, to a very short space of time afterwards apologizing for that and admitting that she must be terribly transphobic and she hadn't understood, and she would examine her sexual preferences, etc., etc. And that takedown happened in a very, very short space of time. Do you know the sort of
I do recognize, yeah, I do know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Is that it was that a one-off? Is that common? You know, is that sort of pressure?
I think it's very common, and I think like a lot of ideological things, it doesn't have to be said. You know, it doesn't always require abuse. It just happens, and it doesn't require someone necessarily orchestrating the kind of pylon that young woman went through. It's just, even in setting that example, what can happen to you if you do speak openly about, you know, the reality of female homosexuality. And I think that's kind of the most common, or one of the most common forms of like lesbophobic abuse, is that there is no such thing as exclusive female homosexuality. You know, you get blokes being like, you know, I can turn you, you just haven't met the right one, that sort of thing. And women say that sort of thing. So I think it's all ideologically set up, basically. And the pressure to conform and to not really speak about those subjects, I think that it's also kind of the lack of openness that you get with these postmodern identity politics, where you're not really allowed to critically examine things and look at things. And
no debate.
No debate, exactly. So a lot of women just think, oh, it's just easier for me to like keep my mouth shut about it. And I've seen just kind of lesbian accounts, generally of like masculine gender non-conforming lesbians, who just get piled on for using the wrong kind of language to talk about their lives, or saying, you know, I am a woman, but I guess I'm a bit masculine. Oh, that means you're trans mask. I guess on trans masc, maybe I don't know, oh, but you can't be trans masc and call yourself a woman, and then just pile on and pile on and pile on. It just creates an incredibly tense atmosphere, is really what I've noticed.
So,
and yeah.
Given all of that pressure, what is astonishing is that there are any lesbians left, and here we are all over the globe gathering together and fighting. I mean, you know, just as a measure, within 2 weeks of setting up Lesbian Fight Back, just a Twitter page, really, a Twitter account, there were 3,000 followers within 2 weeks. You know, that was December just gone. We haven't gone away. We're there. That's what I mean. That's what hopefully this series of interviews will show. But you know, organising together as lesbians, whether it's Lesbian Labour or what you know, Lesbian Rights Alliance, whatever the specific lesbian organisations are. I know that you had some to do with Vancouver Lesbian Collective. So you know, obviously that was part of the pushback, or was it always there? How did that come into being? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'm no longer part of it, but yeah, it's Vancouver Lesbian Collective is a group of lesbian feminists in Vancouver who are looking to represent the voices of lesbians, specifically in relation to gender identity, but also other things like they're big advocates for guaranteed livable income and other sort of political issues that affect lesbians. And it is really a miracle. And every time I do see, you know, even lesbians on TikTok, living lesbian lives out, I'm very happy. There is a huge amount of resilience that's present in women. I think that resilience comes with a lot of silence on specific issues about the nature of your homosexuality. And it's unfortunate that there is that trade-off. But I think when young lesbians or lesbians in general really see groups like Lesbian Fight Back or Lesbian Labour, Vancouver Lesbian Collective, or see gender critical views, I get lots of likes, I get lots of positive feedback from lesbians who often reach out to me in private out of fear. So it is amazing kind of the resilience that is possible in these circumstances, because female homosexuality is real, basically.
Yeah.
There is nothing.
Do you think the fact that we've all had a lot of practice at this, because it was once essential for survival to be underground and coded about everything, signals, knowing your gaydar, as it's called, you know, we always did meet in secret in many ways. So for me, I feel like I've just gone back to how it was. I didn't feel comfortable with the era of so-called assimilation when we were, you know, apparently we've got all our rights and we can all be happy and, you know, gung-ho now. It never felt real to me. It just felt like people had been told the script of what to say, and that's now they're allowed to not say it anymore now. So we do have to be careful again, but we're comfortable underground. We know how to be. So in many ways, you know, I think the roots didn't get chopped.
Yes.
And so I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
It does. And I see little like kind of pockets of where lesbian life can be really actualized. And one of those is women's sport, which I think is something why like we should be so passionate about protecting it. You know, there are comments of like, oh, there are other things that matter more, like prisons and other kind of single sex spaces. Like we you know, people just care about sport because men care about it. There's an element of truth to that. But I think protecting women's sport is so important because I see so much lesbian experience and resilience within women's sport. A lot of the social media content I see and a lot of the lesbians I know are involved in women's sport in some way or another. So I think that we continue, we go on, you know, despite having to be underground. And I hope that this is kind of I think that a lot of people are losing patience. I think we're reaching near the end of kind of the big swell of this. And I hope that in future more lesbians can be open about their objections, because I know that they do have them, because I get constant messages about it.
Yeah. And in your own lived experience, how important has lesbian space, lesbian only space been to you?
Oh, massively important. Women only space, very important. Lesbian only space, incredibly important. And I still find it incredible and a bit overwhelming that it's in some senses illegal in some places for lesbians to meet without men. Like and I really do have a lot of sympathy for, and I'm really thoughtful about those women who aren't necessarily explicitly gender critical, but are wanting to organize lesbian events and are met with this like tense politics that they have to navigate. And it's really important that we were able to carve out those spaces. And I think it requires a huge amount of building strength and being able to assert boundaries and being able to say no, things that as women we're not generally socialized to do or rewarded for. It really means confronting that kind of socialization to be able to say, no, this is for lesbians only. And I remember at one event I was at, a woman did that, and you could, like, some men showed up, cross-dressing men, and she was able to say, no, sorry, this is a women only, lesbian only event. And they said, no, we are women. She said, no, you're not. I'm sorry, you can't be here. And it was difficult for her. You could tell it's not something that she wanted to do, but she did it. And the results were, it was such an important thing to do, a show of integrity. So I think that would be what I have to say to lesbians, is that, it's, I can't say that it's easy or that it's
hold the line,
immediately rewarded, but it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah. So that neatly leads into how we deal with conflict, because not only are we up against it in terms of our right to organise autonomously as lesbians, and let's not pretend there are examples of actual physical attacks on any same-sex attracted lesbians doing the pride parades or any sort of public exposure or expression of same-sex attraction. But we also have conflict within the movement, because obviously it's difficult to all be on the same page. So conflict resolution, difficult topic. Have you anything to bring to that, Hannah?
I do. It's something that is difficult for everyone. I think that it's really important, I think, when we say the personal is political, not to be dogmatic about that slogan. And I think that that's relevant to this conversation, because I think there's a confusion within feminism often, that if there's a political difference, that means there's a personal difference, or that this conflict is personal. And some things can just be political. You can't just have a political disagreement. It could arise from personal experience, but it's important to acknowledge that, there are political differences. There are some lesbians who feel that we should still work within the LGBT acronym. There are lesbians who feel that we shouldn't. There are, different kind of variations of separatism. There's lots of disagreement where people, just because we all have the same sexual orientation doesn't mean we're all going to have the same politics. And I think it's really important to be able to engage in political disagreement with being like, this is, not personal. This is just, we disagree politically here, and what are we going to do about it? I was really inspired by, and definitely recommend everyone to read, this book, Constructive Criticism by Gracie Lyons, which is an amazing book. If anyone, this is a call to action to your listeners, if anyone knows Gracie Lyons or knows who she is, because she wrote this book, and I search her name on Google about every 3 months, trying to find where this woman is or what happened to her. I don't know. Anyway, if she wrote anything else. But if you do know, send me a message on Twitter, because I want to thank her. It's a really great book. And it outlines constructive criticism. And it's a method I've seen used in feminists in Canada. And it really forces women to confront those kind of, that socialization of, because often we pretend to agree just because we want consensus, just because we want things to be easy, just because we just want to move on, we don't want conflict. But what this method does is really gives you tools to kind of parse out the nitty gritty of what that disagreement is, And what I really like about it is that the advice is when you give a piece of constructive criticism, it has to be very specific. It can't be, Paula, I think you're lazy. Stop being so lazy. It has to be, Paula, you were supposed to do this piece of work on Tuesday and you did not. Whatever. It has to be very specific about a kind of behavior. Then you talk about how you feel. I was really affronted when you didn't do that. It made it hard for my day. Then you offer a political reason why you want this criticism is important, and then you offer a behavior change. And I think that really gets to like the nitty-gritty of where these conflicts come from, and gives women space to really speak openly, because I think this kind of very feminine, nice thing where pretend we get along all the time can be very, very toxic and actually not very helpful, because we end up creating false consensus. We end up building resentment. We end up, engaging in passive aggression. So it is important to confront these things when they come up. And I think, acknowledging that like these things are political differences. Sometimes you can have a political difference that's not always personal.
And I think that's really important because, my other work in Women Uniting, which was about bringing the political parties together, the
Right.
Women fighting for women's rights and single sex spaces, etc., in each political party, to find myself as a, several generations down the line, dyed in the wool, extremely left-wing woman,
Right.
sitting in a room with Tories doing anything, was originally, initially a shock to the system. But actually, there are issues that we all have in common, and if we focus on those issues and get the work done on those issues, then we move forward. And it is that very thing. Who are we all in bed with is a hot topic, isn't it? And we've got everything from those who necessarily adopt a very purist line to those who are willing to be in coalition. And I remember my dad. I was brought up with the agitate, educate, and organise slogan, all the time. And if you have to be such and such a person in order to get that coalition going, then that's what you need to do. You need to be adaptable in order to get through. You need to be able to use arguments. You need to be able to stand in the other person's shoes to understand it, and therefore be able to take their argument down and bring them on side. So, to me, coalition is absolutely the way, and I find the factionalism quite difficult. So that's a very useful tool in dealing with that.
Right. And for me, it's like, if there's a park down the road and they want to bulldoze the park and put up some new builds, and I'm against it and my Tory neighbor is against it, it's like, I don't care how you feel about Brexit, I want to get the park back.
Yeah.
Like, what are we going to do about this particular thing? And I think it's important to note that coalition work is like a far left tradition. Like, we're talking Trotsky, we're talking Bolshevik, we're talking the furthest left possible.
Yes.
Always engaged in coalition work. And even within feminism, work on prostitution and pornography and these sorts of issues, there were times where there was alliances made or coalitions made with conservatives or with religious people, where we say we agree about this one issue and that's it, and when we're done, we split. So I think it requires a lot of maturity and reflectiveness or reflection, and I think it's politically appropriate often. And I agree with you that the factionalism gets very annoying.
I think also what you've just said there, you were using terminology and I just used terminology which reveals that both of us have got a politically trained past. So if you've been involved in politics in its broader sense, and you haven't just come to this issue as the first issue that's got you going, I think there is that split as well within the movement, because there are women who have come to this completely never having done any activism in their lives, and that's fine as well, because you also need that raw passion to get something done. But being strategic about the way forward is quite difficult when you've got all those levels of political nous going on as well. Anyway, that's for another topic, but we are rather neatly now round to politics, in the official sense of the word. So have you got any comments about how the how the Labour movement is dealing with lesbophobia or the rights of lesbians? Anything to say on that?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that the state of Labour in the UK is the Labour movement generally, not just Labour Party. It's really interesting to me in sharp contrast to what's going on in Canada. I'm a very proud Canadian trade unionist. You know, we have like a very, because it's a country that's based all on resource extraction, basically loggers, miners, oil rig workers, that sort of thing. Canadian Labour is very, very powerful, and we have collective bargaining rights, which you don't really have here. So the unions own the jobs. If you want to be a oil rig worker in Canada, you have to be part of the union. It's not negotiable. You are in part of a collective bargaining unit that, you know, is legally binding with your employer. Just things that don't exist in this country. So I got to say that the state of Labour in general in the UK, beyond sexual politics, I find a bit dismaying, especially with this massive cost of living crisis coming. I don't really, and you would expect with a country with a Labour Party that, you know, things would be further along than they are, and I find it yeah, altogether a bit shocking. But yeah, it's been distressing and alarming seeing how trade unions have adopted this political line, adopted these sorts of sexual politics, and the space for lesbians in these unions being very like basically very marginalized. I see a lot of queer stuff. Basically, I see a lot of trans stuff. I don't see a lot about lesbians or homosexuality really in the UK trade union movement. I don't see a lot of like combating lesbophobia in the workplace, or how we're going to go to employers with the demands of lesbians, what specific workers' rights that we do need. I don't see any of that really, and I think yeah, I find it all very distressing. And of course, everything that's been going on in the Labour Party, for which you're a bit more on the nose of, I just see this from the outside, this flip-flopping. It seems like they have one line on sex-based rights one day, and they kind of flip-flop to another line, and they really think they can have their cake and eat it too, is what I observed. They know that these politics are deeply unpopular with a lot of their women membership, but also want to appease kind of this like cohort of young, university educated bourgeois white people who seem incredibly enthusiastic about it. And I think this thing of flip-flopping between the two, I just don't know how they're going to maintain it really. So I find it all incredibly disappointing. And I think in the gender critical movement, broadly speaking, there's been a lot of talk about employment and employment rights. And, you know, with the Alison Bailey case, with the Maya Forstater, there's been a couple more high profile cases, I suppose, about employment. There seems to be employment rights, seem to be a huge element of the gender critical movement and protecting employment rights for women who believe in single sex spaces, who believe in sex-based rights. And so I think there's an opportunity there to work with labor, like where are the unions? When these women are being sacked or threatened with sacked or bullied threatened to be sacked or bullied in the workplace or whatever, like they should be there. So yeah,
well, I'd agree that they clearly aren't. I mean, given that the TUC adopted self-ID with only 4 unions abstaining some years ago now, there was no consultation with women members at all. So yeah, it's a serious fight to try and get the voice of you know, that, well, as you've referred to it as the gender critical voice, but actually trying to argue anything as lesbians autonomously within Labour is you know, very, very difficult. And as I know you're aware of this, Hannah, but the representative group supposedly is LGBT Labour, who you would think would be representing lesbians, but because they've adopted the Stonewall line, then obviously same-sex attracted adult human females are no longer the definition of lesbian. So, you know, it goes around in ever decreasing circles. And, you know, we'll have to see what Keir says when we finally get to speak to him.
I mean, Keir says a different thing every second day. I mean, it's a bit shocking. I don't know. I think that well, I'm sure you have more thoughts about this than I have, Paula, but I think that he's very shrewd, and I think that he's a barrister, and I think that he's really trying to get both sides of this thing, which is always going to be a losing strategy. But it's yeah.
It is. There's quite a long way to go on all of that, isn't there? There really is. So just finally, I mean, you mentioned Pride came up a little bit earlier on when you were talking about Canada. Here you are now in Britain, and it's Pride Month. And what do you think Pride Month in this country appears to be about?
Very similar to a lot of corporate sponsorships and rainbow flags outside of banks, and it just seems incredibly corporate. And I think that the trade-off, kind of what I saw, was the people complaining about how corporate it was, but it was this like fabulous party, and it was fun, and people would go out and drink in the streets and whatever. I don't even see any of that. Like, it just doesn't seem fun for anyone. I think it's turned into like, there's also this weird tension between, is this a family event? Is this an adult event? Where do we draw that line? And it's always just been about, well, this is why transgenderism is so popular in and among organizations like Pride, is that it really removes what was actually confrontational about the gay liberationist movement to start with. Which is that the nuclear family is not the only family structure that is possible for people, and that is, you know, challenging to capitalism. The family is the basic unit of capitalism, and all of that has been removed with transgenderism, because it's not actually about homosexuality anymore. It's not about having an alternative to the status quo. It's not countercultural. Anything that a bank supports is not countercultural by like definition, right? So I see it as a weird mix between a party for straight people and like something that like yuppie liberals go to with their kids and are just like made uncomfortable by weird fetishists. Like, it's just a really strange event. I don't know what they think the purpose of it is anymore, and it's certainly not a welcoming place for lesbians, you know.
And within that, the symbols that are used to denote that a space is now friendly towards lesbians, or that you would be welcome there. In the olden days, what did you have in Canada? What did you recognise as that symbol? Has that changed, and how do you react to the flags and symbols now?
Well, I mean, it was the Pride flag, which was just the rainbow flag. And I talked to some lesbians who were around in like the 90s and the 80s going to Pride, and they were like, it was nice. Like, it was like the gay men's choir would do a little event. We would do something. There was like dykes on bikes. There was the Dyke March, which is not something that you have here, but it's I think an American tradition, which was always something that kind of existed outside of Pride, that was more feminist, that was more radical. And the Dyke March now has been subsumed into Pride, and it just kind of comes across as like a low budget. Like, my personal view, and I've other women have said this as well, is that they are probably given about, if the budget for Pride is $1 billion, they're probably given about $5,000, $2,000 to put on this little Dyke March. It just comes across so poxy, and then there's, it's mostly men there. So anything that's been challenging has just been sucked out. And now it's this new progress Pride flag with the funny triangle and the trans stuff, and the incredibly bizarre having the racial stripes in there, as if being gay and racialized is mutually exclusive. So they need to like point it out. It's weirdly so tokenizing and strange, made by a white gay man, as far as I can tell, who has copyrighted that. He's become very rich off that. Like, the original Pride flag was free for everyone to use. Every time that Pride flag is used anywhere in public, a little bit of money goes to that man. So it's been a huge change.
Yeah. certainly not something you would particularly see as a, oh, there's that flag, I'll be welcome in there then.
No, I think it's incredibly hostile.
Mm.
It's so fascinating how quickly like ideology does the work. Like this stuff has been, it's been what, 18 months? Like maybe 2 years since the triangle flag started, not very long. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and actually, I did hear recently that you actually have to have permission to fly a flag. So, you know, at towns and town civic halls that were flying the rainbow flag, that had been granted permission. The new one hasn't been granted that permission yet. But like the rest of this corporate capture and, you know, capture of all the other sectors, nobody's noticing. You know, it's this steamroller that's just going ahead. So and one other thing in terms of marches, just to highlight that the reaction from lesbians in this country after the debacle that was the 2018 attempt to make the point at Pride that lesbians are erased by trans activism, was to come up with Lesbian Strength, which will be coming up this year, September the 17th in Leeds. So, you know, any lesbian who knows what a lesbian still is, come along. And I do hope, Hannah, that we can convince you to speak at that. So,
that would be nice.
It's been very, very enlightening to listen to your very unique perspective on all of this. And thank you for continuing to be a clear voice in the fog of this confusion that's going on. And I think we'll leave it there unless there's anything you wanted to add.
Oh, you can just follow me on Twitter at Hannah Borelli, HANNAHBERRELLI, and follow me on TikTok under the same name as long as I have that account. Thanks so much and follow Lesbian Labour, obviously, on all your social media platforms.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah.
You're welcome.